welcome to the channel. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Join me on today's video where we'll be reviewing the Pagani PD1706. Now this is the improved version to the previous version that they did. Of course it's homaging the BB58 and this is now with the GMT movement. So we already done the unboxing a couple of weeks ago and this is what you get in the box: guarantee card, a user manual. They also provided an extra NATO strap and oops, there you go, and of course you have the watch. Now this is their premium edition, so they have upgraded some of the specifications as well as improved some of the finishing present. We looked at a couple of features in the unboxing and I've got to say I was quite impressed with what they have improved so far. One thing I didn't like, I felt that the box that you see here, it is very oversized. I think it's a bit excessive, but anyway, it does a good enough job of protecting the watch, and yes, it does fit in with the whole premium line that they're trying to get out there. So that being said, this watch will cost you around £90 or $122, and it seems they have started to reduce their prices just slightly. At the start of the year they came out with quite a few models and they did try that premium line then, but the watches started going to over £100, around the £120. You know, for Pagani design, that is asking quite a bit of money, especially if nothing really has changed. So throughout this review, we're going to look at how good this watch is, and I can already tell you it's got some pretty stunning features that I'm very impressed with from Pagani design, and added with that price of £90, $120 odd, I think it may turn out to be a very incredible watch indeed. So as you can see, the one I have in front of me is the Pepsi version. They do another two versions. The dial color remains the same. They do a Batman bezel with a change in the GMT hand to blue, and they also do a Coke bezel. I think with a certain color setup, the Coke bezel looks better, but you know, this is what we have in front of us. So let's go ahead, check out the specifications and also the dimensions, and then get into the review where we break this watch down bit by bit. So with regards to specification, you have a full 316L stainless steel case construction. You also have a box sapphire crystal, a 120 click unidirectional bezel with an anodized aluminium bezel insert. The watch runs the Pearl DG5833A automatic GMT movement. The movement does hack and wind. It also features a GMT and date complication, and you also have 200 meters of water resistance, a screw down crown and a screw down case back. Now with dimensions, you do have a 40mm diameter case, you do have a 48mm lug to lug, a thickness of 14.3mm and a lug width of 20mm. The overall weight is around 170 grams. Taking a closer look at the dial, you will see a mixture of printed and applied features. You've got printed text at the 12 o'clock with Pagani Design's logo, and above the 6 you've got a fair bit of text. You've got GMT, automatic and the water resistance rating. I think it looks pretty decent. I don't think it looks crowded as much. A bit of a subjective one with the amount of text that you're happy with. Now at 3 o'clock you do have a date window. The date window, due to the movement, is kind of small on this watch. It could really benefit with a magnification glass. Looking at the hour markers, they are all applied. They do have a highly polished frame. And you also got a printed minute tracker around the dial and the handset. Yes, you know what kind of hands they are. These are the snowflake style of hands. That square on the seconds hand and also that larger snowflake on the hour hand. The mini hand is just a sword style hand, all fully polished. And the GMT is a large arrow hand. It is finished in a glossy red paint, and the white that you see inside of the hands, that is the applied Lume. Now the GMT hand, look at the proportions, it does stretch out all the way to the minute track. I think the proportions on this watch are quite decent. As you can see, the hour hand sits just right in front of that baton, and the minute hand stretches long enough, and that seconds hand is also touching that minute track. So they've got the proportions correct, which is actually quite good to look at. Does really improve the visual on the dial and does increase that legibility. When it comes to the Lume, they have applied the Lume on all the hour markers on this aluminium bezel insert, and they also applied it on the actual dial itself. So I am looking forward to this Lume shot because I really want to see if they have improved that at all. Traditionally, we know with Pagani design, the Lume has been quite poor throughout pretty much all the models. Now, straight away, it is a lot better, at least 2 or 3 times better than all the other watches. You can see the ceramic bezel insert has been lumed really well. That's probably the brightest, followed by the hour markers, again surprisingly well lit. really well done. You do see a bit of patchiness, slight fade, but definitely a massive improvement on the previous dials. The hands are quite lacking, they are quite dull. Even when I give it some assistance with a UV lamp, it doesn't really change the hands just so much. They could do with just a lot more lume applied. I don't think that'll take it out of the budget as much. I think just another dollar or two spent on the dial and just really making that lume shine through. And I think they'll win so many people over because that is one of the major flaws they have. However, they have definitely improved the lume. It's nice to see they finally have taken something on board and they are looking to improve on, you know, the notorious failings that they do have. Moving across to the bezel, I did mention it does have a anodized aluminium bezel insert. Now they do claim that it's got hardness that equals sapphire. I think that's just a lot of nonsense. I don't actually believe it is. I think it might be fairly easy to scratch. Having said that, you know, the anodization does give it a bit of a gloss effect. And they did upgrade this bezel insert. The color of that blue wasn't quite right, so a few people did complain. Now you do have this really striking blue and red, giving that Pepsi color combination. Now what you notice also about the bezel, it is slightly sloped and then it sits just under that box style sapphire crystal, which does protrude quite a bit. And of course that crystal will protect that bezel insert if you do bang your hand against anything, so that's okay. The coin edge bezel that you have here is also sloped, fully polished around the sides, and the machining is actually fairly good as well. There's nothing that stands out, there's no sharp edges. And as I looked at in the unboxing, this is, I think, the best bezel they have done to date. You know, they did improve that sub Homage, however that was after quite a while. This is a further improvement from the previous model of this, and you can just see there's no lateral play, there's no bounce in the bezel. It is a 90 click bezel, unidirectional of course, and no play again, which is just amazing on its own to have zero playback. So as we go to rotate it, very precise clicks. Now it does not align at the 12. You'll notice it just goes either one step before or one step after. But I'm going to give Pagani a massive pass on this. The fact that they did fix that bezel and made it so good, so stable, and they took away that nasty playback that they had and all that movement and bounce, I think they deserve a pass on that. What do you guys think? I think definitely massive improvement, and I think that is really good to see. Now let's have a quick look at the movement. Now Pagani state they are using the Pearl DG5833A movement. I did a bit of research and I couldn't really find too much information on this new updated version to the previous movement. I still believe it is the DG2833, you know, the GMT movement they used in a lot of the sub homages, and I think with some bits of information that are there, it does sort of point towards that it is just a renamed movement. There is a slight possibility they made some slight changes, but it's a bit unclear on what they exactly have changed. Now, looking at the accuracy first and foremost, on the time graph, this shows around 14 to 16 seconds a day, and that is in a single position. Now, what I did notice while I rotated the watch throughout various different positions, that there was a high fluctuation between the B error and of course the accuracy as well changed from -3, +6, 14, 12. And I think this is what you'll find with the cheaper movements. It's nowhere near as accurate as the NH35 Seiko movement as a comparison. However, I think it is still quite reliable. When you do research this movement, you don't really come across any horror stories. As with any movement, yes, they can all break eventually. But in terms of, you know, for the price point, I think it is quite reliable in that sense. Now, I did mention it is a GMT movement. It does have a GMT hand. But having said that, it's not a proper GMT movement, as that GMT hand does not move in 1 hour increments. It's quite free to rotate. And if you move the crown on the other side, you will also move the date. Now, one thing with the GMT hand, when you are setting it, it does move. So if you set it at, let's say, this 6 o'clock here, when you press it back in, it'll jump slightly. I think the easiest way around that is just to set it slightly behind the hour you want to set it at, and then it should jump to more or less the closest part. Now, as said, it's a cheap movement. It's not a true GMT. However, it does function quite well. So it does hack also, and it does hand wind. I will say this movement is slightly noisy as well. While I was getting ready to review the watch, I was handling this watch and I did hear the rotor quite a few times. Honestly, I don't think that's a big issue. There are some people that are quite sensitive to that, so it's worth mentioning. Now, one of the most standout features of this watch is definitely the case. That is something which definitely caught my eye in the unboxing. If we take a closer look and look at the finishing that they have got here, let's look at the lug tips, and you'll see it's very difficult to kind of ascertain what kind of finishing is present. Of course, it is brushed, but I can't tell if it's linear or circular. But what I can say, it is very, very finely brushed. So huge point to Pagani design for that. And you can see across the end links as well, again, equally fine brushing, but you can see this is straight vertical linear brushing. Now we move the case to the side, and what you'll notice from the lug tips going across the whole side of that case, the whole side profile, is a highly polished edge, which does taper down as it gets to lug tips. It gets slightly wider, and that taper just gets a bit thinner as it goes around the edge. And I think that's really good to see. It definitely makes that case stand out, adds a gorgeous highlight. It gives another surface for the light to reflect and bounce off. And I think that's done actually really well. I love that brushing. It is very fine brushing. It feels so smooth to touch, and definitely I think it does really fit in with this new premium light that they are doing. This is probably the best finishing I have seen on Pagani design watch. Now there is a slight bit of error on this. If you look at where the brushing on the side of the case meets that highly polished edge, you'll see that it is quite rough. It isn't as crisp and clean as you'd like, but you know, you do have to bear in mind it is a £90 or $120 watch, so there's only so much you can expect. I think for that price point they have done incredibly well. I think again it can be overlooked quite easily. While we're talking about QC, there's one thing I didn't mention on the bezel insert, and of course I think some of you guys must have spotted it already. Looking at the markers in between the numbers, the dots, you can see where that lume has slightly overrun. It's not a perfect dot, not a perfect circle by any means. Definitely a massive QC issue on there. Looking at the case back, you'll see a stamped case back. You'll see the Pagani design logo, you'll see some specifications, and you'll see a few different finishing elements. It's circular brushed, it's also bead blasted. There might be some polishing present also. Now the case back is a touch rough, nothing that is going to scratch or affect your arm, but just, yeah, not as fine as you'd probably like to feel. But again, that price point is actually not an issue at all. 200 meters water resistance, along with some specifications that are printed on there, as well as the model number. So the crown, it is really grippy. I think the thickness they've got right. It's actually quite a pleasure to hold. It is also signed and sandblasted in the center with the polished Pagani logo. But there is this red color. Now, while I think on the Coke bezel and this Pepsi bezel it might look okay, I think on the Batman one it might stand out quite a bit. And now it's not a security feature where you will find some crowns do have a bit of red. That signifies that the crown is screwed out and you need to screw it back in. But this is not the case. It's just a collar, and I think they should, in all honesty, get rid of it so that there is just a bit of a better match on the actual watch. You know, like I said, color dependent. I don't mind it. If the colors don't match, then it will stick out for no reason. So yeah, good move on the crown. Screws in and out pretty well. Threads don't catch. But it is machined quite well. Moving across to the bracelet, and I think they've done particularly well on the bracelet. You do have solid curved end links. The fit and finish is really well. I already spoke about the finishing. The brushing on here is immaculate, very fine indeed. Now you'll also notice those female end links. When we look at the bracelet, it does taper down from 20mm to 18mm at the clasp. Looking at the links, they are all solid. You do have these 4 rivets, where the bottom one is actually just a rivet which doesn't move, but then you do have screw-in links that do hold the bracelet together. Now this is a 5-link design. I'll take out the links that I took out earlier, and you can see when you do remove the screw, these bits of the links do actually come apart. So again, I think a lot of detail gone into this bracelet, a lot of thought has gone into it. I don't mind the fact that the rivets are faux, where you can't remove them, but you do have the screw-in links, and I think it still makes it relatively easy to size this bracelet. This didn't take me long at all. The screws are so-so. I think it's going to be hit and miss. Some do have pretty good threading, some are just a bit tight, but nothing which you know, kind of stumped me, so that's good. Clasp, you do have a folding clasp with the outer press shell, but there is a fair bit of detail on here. It's also been formed, so you have this centerpiece which does add strength to this case back. Polished sides, 2 spring pushers on either side, Pagani design logo in the center, all done really well. I'm a huge fan of the new clasps. I think it definitely improves the bracelet design, definitely adds something to the bracelet, and it's finished quite well. You've got 3 micro adjusts, and you also have a dive extension, which they have put in the previous model. It is only a simple diver's extension. It's quite you know, cheap, but it works, it's effective, and again, at that $120 price point, you really can't ask for more. So yeah, the consistency is present in the bracelet. The links do move pretty well together, and yeah, polished sides. So there is a lot of detail present on this watch. So here is the Pagani PD1706 GMT BB58 Homage, and this is sized to my 6.5 inch wrist. I will say it's just a touch tight. I did have to remove 3 links from each side, and it is on the full micro adjustments. Good dimensions, 48mm lug to lug with the female end links, really good fit, great comfort of that case, and 40mm diameter. The thickness is pretty decent considering it does have that box style sapphire, so around 14.5mm on the case thickness. So I think they've done really well. This watch has kind of surprised me quite a bit. The initial thing was in the unboxing that the bezel was so good, so I'm glad they did fix that, and I hope to continue that. And the second thing, the lume is a lot better than it has been. I think it's probably the best lume that they have done on a watch. You know, I've looked at so many of the previous models where it's just so dull. I think the hands could definitely do with improving in the lume side, but you know, I think for Pagani, that's a step in the right direction. Everything else has been built quite well, actually. As I mentioned about the case, the bracelet, I love the highlights along the sides of the case. I love that fine brushing. You know, I don't know what it is. Maybe the watches that I'm looking at these days, that seems to be the theme. I have seen such a massive upgrade in the level of finishing present on these watches, and the sides of the case are just so slick, and that polished edge does seem to highlight the case really well. Of course, I mentioned that it isn't the best. You can just see the edges aren't as crisp and clear between those transitions. However, not a deal breaker at all. And bracelet, as I mentioned, surprisingly good, surprisingly well built, and very comfortable. So I think this is a clear-cut winner. It's probably, I'd say, the best watch Pagani design has made, and I think it looks pretty cool as well. And you know, they've increased the water resistance, so they've given us quite a lot for not that much increase in price. You know, still $120. You get a much bigger box, and you do definitely get a much more premium version of their watches. So I think they've definitely have nailed it. Yeah, well done, Pagani. And I think anybody wanting to buy this watch, definitely pull the trigger. If you are a massive fan of Pagani design, this is one of the better watches that they have made. So I hope you guys enjoyed that review. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.